Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm Emily Anderson, the founder of Mom Crew. I founded Mom Crew when I lived in New York City in 2019. That's where both my kids were born. When the pandemic hit, we actually moved back to the West Coast where we had been before that and are currently in Los Angeles. So I have a daughter who is 4.5, closer to 5 at this point, and I have a son who just turned 2. I know all about mom stress, mom guilt, all the things, comparisons. I'm really looking forward to today's topic because it really can be so hard, for us moms when there's so much on our minds and we're concerned about our children and seeing so many other kids and, just on any given day have 1.5 million things to do. So I am really excited to partner with Vivvi. We've run a lot of events together in the past. They're always great. They're so informative. Vivvi is an amazing organization. But I will let Gretchen talk more about that. So I'm going to turn it over to her in just a second. In the meantime, please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself. And if you have any questions that come up, just add them to the chat and we will get to them at the end.
Thanks, Emily. And thanks so much. It's so nice to see some familiar names and some new names. So love that we're bringing together a community and expanding our community as we talk through these topics. I'm going to share my screen as well because we have a really wonderful presentation here for you. So pardon my technical, see the insides of my PowerPoint. All right, here we go. So again, thank you to Emily. Thank you to Ilyse, who we'll get to learn about in just a sec. On behalf of Vivvi, okay, I'm spotlighted. Okay, I thought I was on mute. On behalf of Vivvi, it's so great to welcome you today as well. We know, as Emily said, this is just a really great conversation on a topic that's hitting home for all of us. And I think universal to moms, families, people. As Emily said, I'm Gretchen Richer. I'm head of family experience at Vivvi. And I also always forget to mention this, but I have a 4-year-old who attends Vivvi a couple days a week. And so I'm a mom and a Vivvi employee at the same time. We are on a mission to reinvent childcare and early learning for today's families. And we do it in a couple different ways. First, in New York, our 3 campuses specialize in care and learning for ages 6 weeks to 5 years. And then nationally, our in-home programs, which take our teachers and everything about the school model and place it inside your home, expands the coverage to truly meet families wherever they are. And as Emily said, we'll use about the first 30 minutes or so to present some really great information about all things focused on managing stress, particularly as it relates to the holiday season. And then, comparing yourself to others, which I, despite my best intentions, have probably done it about 3 times already today, if not more. Then we'll head over to the chat function and spend some good time in some discussion. I'm particularly excited about this webinar because I think the topic is so relevant, not just from a seasonal perspective and timely perspective, but really it could be applied any time of the year for any type of occasion or relationship. I think you'll feel really great knowing that the resources Ilyse will be bringing to you can be applied to the present as well as well into the future. So I hope you'll be able to recycle this info again and again, even if it's just one practical, simple tip, gesture, or way of thinking in your day-to-day. And we're so excited to have clinical psychologist and author of Mom Brain, Ilyse Dobrow DiMarco, as our resident expert for today's webinar. You might have joined us earlier this year where she shared science-based strategies to help understand and navigate the quote-unquote mom brain. As well, she's a fellow mom, so she's really bringing all of the sides of her brain to the table here as both a professional and a mother. And Ilyse, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you could share just a little bit more info about who you are and then kind of the methodology or the background of where all of this content came to be, and then we'll let you take the ropes.
Sure, sounds good. And thank you, both of you guys, for having me. I'm really excited to be here talking about mom holiday stress, which I am currently experiencing myself. So I can relate. So yes, as Gretchen mentioned, my name is Ilyse Dobrow DiMarco. I'm a clinical psychologist and writer based in Summit, New Jersey, which is a suburb of New York City. I have 2 boys who are now 7 and 10. And as far as how I got here, it was kind of by accident that I started doing this work. My training was in cognitive behavioral therapy and related evidence-based treatments for anxiety. So I learned how to use CBT tools and related tools. And CBT, when we talk CBT, we're talking about present moment focused, very targeted strategies to help you when you're having a hard time. So CBT and related treatments are less about figuring out sort of the origins of a problem or gaining insight into a problem, and more about figuring out, okay, when this problem comes up, what can we do to combat it? What are the strategies we can use? So I had training in CBT for anxiety and related conditions, and I started my own private practice in the city about at the time that I was getting pregnant with my first son, who's now 10. And so I think because of my particular age and stage in life, I started getting a lot of patients who were similar to me, similar ages, stages in life, who were dealing with a lot of the stresses that come with becoming a parent. As you all know, there are many of them, right? You experience sweeping changes in your emotions, you become a lot more anxious, typically relationship changes ensue, identity changes ensue, work-life balance becomes a big issue, right? So much stuff happens when you first become a parent. And a lot of the moms who were coming to my practice were seeking help in managing all of those, the upheavals. And I was seeking help with it as well, right? Because I was going through the same stuff. And I started to use the cognitive behavioral strategies that I knew how to use for things like generalized anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety disorders in general. I started to use those things and adapt them to help the moms I was treating. And it turned out that it was a really good fit. They seemed to work really well. These strategies were kind of what these moms were hungering for, me as well. And then I started to think about, okay, I wonder if anybody's writing about this. Like, have people like me who are expert in CBT, like, are they adapting this for moms? And not many people were doing that kind of work. And so I started writing about it first for, parenting websites. And the more I wrote, the more into the writing I got. And then eventually it led to me writing a book called Mom Brain, which Gretchen mentioned, which came out in May. So that's where my background is and where I might come from. In talking about what we might discuss in today's webinar, comparison making kind of came out strong because all of us who were talking, myself and the folks at Vivvi, all of whom are parents, we were like, yeah, comparison making is a big thing and a big deal. And even more so, I think, since the pandemic started. And we were talking about comparison making in relation to the holidays too, because that happens a lot, where you're looking at what other people are doing for the holidays, what other moms are doing, and finding that maybe you don't stack up. And feeling bad as a result. So we thought this was a really good time to talk through some coping strategies for comparing specifically, and then just some general coping strategies for managing holiday stress. So that's what today's focus is going to be.
Thank you so much for giving us a little context. We love that you started writing, and we love that Mom Brain, the book, came out because of this and led us to you to really help us deal and have some tools and resources for what we'll cover today. So why don't you go ahead and let us know?
Sure. So I'm going to start with comparisons, and I'm going to talk about how you identify what is an unfair and unhelpful comparison versus what's a fair and helpful comparison. And I really, I'll kind of teach you how to be like a comparison detective to figure out, which of your comparisons are working for you and which are not. Then I'm going to move to talking about holidays. First talking about holidays in more of a cognitive sense. And by cognitive in CBT, we mean like changing the way you think about things. So I'm going to first start about changing our expectations around holidays. Then I'm going to talk more behaviorally. That's what it sounds like, changing behaviors, in talking about how you can manage holiday stress with planning, delegating, and scheduling. And then I'm going to talk a bit in the end about recognizing what your values are and using those values to dictate the choices you make as you're preparing for all of this holiday joy. And then at the end, of course, we'll do a Q&A. So please don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to get through most of them.
This is great. And Emily and I were just chatting before you got on about the holidays and what things we celebrate and why we do and why we don't and what's important to us and what we've kind of let go by the wayside. So we'll have to, Emily, you and I will have to recap on what traditions and things we keep next year.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start, with comparison making. So as someone who specializes in working with moms, I hear about comparison making constantly. That was true before the pandemic, but like I said, I actually think it got worse during the pandemic because particularly in the beginning, right, we were all sort of stuck at home and reliant on social media for our social connections. And so a lot of moms got very caught up in social media and seeing what other moms were doing on social media. And all kinds of moms, right? We're talking like celebrity moms, what they call quote unquote momfluencers now on Instagram, moms that they knew in their actual life, moms that they maybe knew in 8th grade and have only seen on Facebook since. Exposed to tons and tons of moms on social media and doing a lot of comparing. And of course, there's also the IRL comparing that we all do, right? Like to the moms we see in the drop-off line for daycare, right? To the moms we see in the grocery store, to the moms we see at that birthday party, right? We also can compare our kids sometimes, right? So we'll compare what our kids are doing to what we see other kids doing, either in real life or what their parents are choosing to brag about on social media, right? So there's so much comparing that goes on. I think the holidays are particularly sort of comparison heavy time. It's even like you see those holiday specials that are like they're like dueling houses, right? Well, they'll pick like which house has like the better decorations. I think like the holidays have been set up to almost be like a competitive sport for people. And so I think comparison making really hits a fever pitch during this time. And that's everything from like, I'll have patients come in and say, oh my gosh, I saw what my neighbor is doing to get ready for the holidays. They've got a winter wonderland in front of their house and they're inviting the whole neighborhood for a holiday gathering. And like, God, I haven't even bought a single gift yet and I'm a total mess, right? I'll hear stuff like that. Needless to say, people see on social media what's going on with other people's holiday preparations and, feel very inadequate as a result. So there's a lot of holiday themed comparing happening. Like I was saying before, I think the real trick in dealing with comparison making is becoming a comparison detective and really starting to think about the comparing you're doing and being critical of your comparing, because there's certain comparing that's helpful and there's certain comparing that's not helpful. And if you can tease that apart and kind of catch yourself in unhelpful comparisons and stop yourself, you'll be in a much better place to manage the anxiety, the guilt, all the stuff that can come with comparing. So I want to give 3 sort of examples of unfair comparisons that I hear about all the time from moms. And I want to tell you guys about this so that hopefully you can start to recognize if you're doing one or more of these types of comparing. The first type of comparing that's a real problem is when you're comparing yourself against someone about whom you have little or no information. So this is a celebrity, say on social media, a momfluencer on social media, somebody you don't even know on social media. Again, that friend from 8th grade who you haven't seen since, who you only see on Facebook. Maybe this is a mom you always see at the drop-off line, but you don't really know, right? This is where you look at what these people are putting forward, either in real life or on social media, and using that to make you feel bad about yourself. So here's why this is a problem. I mean, I think I don't have to tell you guys that like in social media in particular, but even in real life, you're putting out what you want people to see. Social media is performative and so is real life, by the way, right? So like you're putting out there a curated version of yourself, and these people are putting out their curated versions of themselves in their own lives. If you don't have any information about these people other than what you see publicly, either on social media or in real life, you don't have enough information to know whether or not they're a fair comparison for you, right? So you've got access to yourself 24/7. You know everything about yourself, about your life, about your kids, right? But I'm sure you've had days where you're a complete mess, but somehow you get it together and you get out and people see you and you look together and you're thinking in your head, oh my God, if they had only seen me 5 minutes ago, I was like a wreck, right? Or my kid was tantruming or whatever else, right? You know that you're often a mess because you have access to yourself 24/7 when like we're all a mess sometimes. But you have no access to these people nor any information about them other than what they're choosing to show you, right? In the case of people like celebrities, momfluencers, et cetera, you don't know how much help these people have with their kids. You don't know what it takes for them to get that perfect picture, that perfect video. You have no idea, right? What the resources are at their disposal to help them. this is true of, other people too, who you don't really know, whether it's that friend from 8th grade or someone you see on the drop-off line. They may seem together. They may seem to be doing an amazing job with X, Y, or Z. But once again, if you don't have information about their lives and you don't know what kind of resources they have, what's going on at home for them, it's not fair to expect yourself to compete, right? And two, remember, like, you don't even know what like 99.9% of their life looks like. You only see a certain slice. They could be a mess the whole rest of the time, right? But you wouldn't know that. So it's really important, if you're comparing, to ask yourself, do I have any information about this person, right? Because if you don't, it just doesn't make sense for you to evaluate yourself against them. Similarly, there's times when we compare ourselves to people where maybe we do have some information, and what that information indicates is that we can't possibly stack up, right? So I'm going to use the example of like the mom in the drop-off line again, because I've heard some version of this like many times, where like patients will say to me, oh my gosh, like, you should see this mom, she's so together and her kids are so together, and like, oh God, I'm on the drop-off line and I'm screaming and my hair's a mess, and this woman is like amazing. And and a mom will kind of go down a shame spiral based on that. And I'll ask, like, can you tell me a little bit about this mom if you have information about her, which sometimes she doesn't. And then it's a problem for the reason we just discussed. But sometimes when she does have the information, she'll say, something like, oh, well, she's got, several nannies at home, or she's very wealthy, or, so it'll be something like that. And I'll say, well, gosh, like, it kind of makes sense that she looks awesome in the morning, doesn't it? Because like, she's got people helping her get her kids out the door, and like, no judgment either way. But if you've got help with that, it's much easier to get your kids out the door if you've got a second set of hands or a third set of hands, right? If, on the other hand, you are, say, a mom and maybe your partner has a crazy work schedule and leaves for work at 6 a.m., so you are the only one shuttling 3 young kids to school, like, it's going to be harder for you, right? Like, you can't possibly stack up to someone who's got a lot of help in the morning. It's just not fair to expect that of yourself. And of course, you could say this about celebrity moms as well, right? Is that like, they have unlimited resources, right? So what does that mean about what they're able to do as on a day-to-day versus what you're able to do? So a lot of times, again, moms will talk to me and they won't consider the information they have, which indicates that, in fact, this comparison is unfair. The third unfair, oh, sorry, go ahead, Gretchen.
That's okay. I'm super grateful for the people who post their like beautiful Christmas or holiday decorations, and then they pan back to the rest of the room and it's a disaster. I love people that kind of put that in your face, and you can, laugh out loud knowing like, oh, that could be my living room. So just shout out to everyone who's showing the mess.
Totally. And I think that's been a thing. Like, there's some great follows on Instagram, some moms who will do that and who will sort of like, really open you up to the good, the bad, and the ugly, which I think is great, because we all experience it. So it's nice to get that validation. The last kind of unfair comparison I want to talk about is when you don't share values with the person to whom you're comparing yourself. So this is another thing I hear about like all the time. So a mom will come in and she'll, go on and say, oh my gosh, you should see what my neighbor is doing for the holidays. She's got this going and that going and everything's like, it's like a winter wonderland. It's amazing, blah, blah, blah. And I will ask, as I always do, like, can you give me do you have information about her? And if so, what information can you give me? And in the case of this third kind of problematic comparison, my patient will say, oh gosh, I let me tell you about my neighbor, like, I can't stand her. And she'll go on and on for a while about how she like doesn't like her neighbor and doesn't like the way she raises her children and doesn't like this and doesn't like that. And I'll stop her and I'll say, whoa. So you're telling me that you're comparing yourself against someone whose opinions you don't value and whose values you don't share. That doesn't make any sense. Like, I always use the analogy, it's as if you're looking for a medical doctor and you go online and you see a doctor and you're not very impressed with their credentials, yet you meet with them anyway and you listen to and follow their medical advice, right? Why would you do that? If you don't respect where that doctor is coming from, right? If you don't respect their training, if you think they're a quack, why would you follow their medical advice? Similarly, why would you compare yourself against someone whose values you don't share? It just doesn't make sense. I hear about this a lot too, involving family members. where, you know, patients will say, oh my gosh, like my sister is constantly judging my parenting and she makes me feel less than, and she makes me feel like a bad parent. And again, I'll say, all right, well, like, can you tell me about your sister and your sister's parenting style? And more often than not, they'll be like, oh gosh, I actually really don't like the choices my sister has made for my nieces and nephews. And they're kind of brats and like they do things really differently. And then I'll say, okay, so you guys clearly have different parenting values, which is going to lead you guys to make different choices and prioritize different things. It is unfair to compare yourself to her when her values are so different from yours. So that's the third instance in which I say, try to watch out for your comparing. If it's clear that this person to whom you're comparing yourself doesn't share your values, it's just not a worthwhile comparison. It just doesn't make sense. Now, the comparisons that do make sense, I think people should actively seek out. And what I usually recommend is find 1, 2, max 3, maybe people in your in your real life, I guess on social media if necessary, but I think in your real life is even better, people whose values you share and whose opinions you value. If they have kids who are slightly older than your kids, all the better, because then they'll have just gone through what you're going through and they can like really give you the scoop, right? Those are the people that you want to consciously choose to compare yourself to and solicit advice from, right? If they're people who are raising their kids in a way that feels similar to the way you are raising your kids, if they're people who have similar, you know, opinions to yours and kind of like, you know, feel like a good fit for you, those are good points of comparison. Again, those are good people to solicit advice from. So again, at the holidays or at any time, you really want to be critical of your comparisons, right? And again, see if you can figure out in your head, okay, is this helpful or is this not helpful? By the way, I do this all the time with myself too, all the time. And I can give you more details on that if you want during the Q&A. Gretchen, we can go to the next one. Okay, so now I'm going to move to kind of holiday stress more generally and some things that you can do to help you manage holiday stress. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to start with some cognitive techniques, basically just kind of changing the way you're thinking about things, and then I'll move on to more behavioral techniques. So the first thing, of course, is just watch your comparison making. Always, but especially during the holidays, as you're seeing what other people are doing, as you're, you know, looking at the Pinterest perfect stuff that's going on around you, really try if you can to watch and challenge your comparison making. The second piece of advice I'm going to give you is to set the bar low for the holidays. I give you this advice because this is something that I did not do and wish I had. In Mom Brain, in my book, the last chapter is actually devoted to holidays and special events and occasions. And the reason I chose to devote a chapter to that is because, in all honesty, of the top 10 most stressful experiences I had when I was a new parent, I would say at least 5 of them occurred in the context of holidays. And I think the reason that happened is because there was for me a wide gulf between what I expected was going to go on for the holidays and what actually did occur during the holidays. So when I had my first son, I was like, oh my gosh, magical. The holidays are going to be amazing. I finally have a kid who I can celebrate these holidays with. In my family, we celebrate Hanukkah and Christmas. So I was like, bring it on. We're going to do everything. It's going to be incredible. And then what happened? The holidays were incredibly stressful because I still had a baby, you know, and as we'll talk about in a little bit, once babies are off schedule and routine, things go haywire really fast. And what would happen was I'd have these overblown expectations, and then the holidays would be a complete hot mess. And there'd be a huge gap between those two things. And it led me to feel stressed and upset and judge myself and feel depressed, all those kinds of feelings. And what I wish someone had sat me down and told me was that, like, holidays with little kids are actually very hard. And so you really want to set the bar low so that you have a likelihood of hitting that bar or maybe even clearing it. So to me, set the bar low would be, for example, like the holiday card pictures. Oh my gosh, I've had a lot of patients talk to me about holiday card pictures. Oh, my kid was crying the whole time. It was a disaster. You got to set the bar low. If you have one picture in which your kid is not crying, success, right? Similarly, oh my gosh, we love to sit down and have this big, I heard about this on Thanksgiving, this big Thanksgiving meal, except that my kid just won't sit. Okay, well, your expectation should be, my kid will sit at the holiday table for 5 to 10 minutes. And then, maybe I'll figure out something for them to do on the side so I can enjoy myself, right? Basically, you want to think about realistically what's going to go down during these holidays and set your expectations accordingly. I really think that will make a big difference. And I truly think that would have helped me deal with, again, like decrease that gap between expectations and reality, which I think really snowed me under. The next thing I want you to think about in terms of holiday prep is playing to your strengths. So when Gretchen and I were talking a couple of days ago, I was telling her, we were kind of like talking about how we're not like Pinterest moms. And for me, this has always been a thing where I am not crafty. I stink at like doing kids' costumes. I stink at making gingerbread. I stink at all of this stuff. And when my older son was first born, like I looked around me, I compared myself to other moms who were doing all this Pinteresty stuff. And I was like, oh, well, I have a kid now, like I should be doing this. And then I would try to do this stuff. I would fail miserably and I'd feel terrible, right? And at a certain point, it occurred to me, like, why am I doing this? I'm not crafty. I hate crafting. And P.S., we'll talk about this more when we talk about values, but like, it's never been something I valued to craft around the holidays. My parents never crafted with me. It was never something we did. So like, why am I expecting myself to do this? I need to play to my strengths. I need to stick with the stuff that I'm good at and really emphasize that stuff. So like for me, for example, like I love to sing. So I'm like big into singing for the holidays with my kids. I'm very big into writing, as has been mentioned. So like I'm really good at like, writing notes from Santa and that kind of stuff, right? Like I realized a couple years in that I really had to play to my strengths and ignore all the other stuff I could be doing, right? And I think that's true of everybody. Like we aren't perfect. We can't do everything possible for the holidays. We can't do all the stuff we see on social media. So we've really got to focus ourselves on the things that we're good at. That helped me a lot.
This might be a good question for later, but also I'm wondering how I've experienced this where I grew up with my mom making my birthday cakes for a long time. And then she sort of fizzled out when both of my brothers were born. But I had the expectation of, I'm going to make all my child's birthday cakes. That is going to be me. And I did it once and I don't do it anymore. But like thinking about the traditions you want to keep and the traditions you want to let go, and how do you navigate that in the family too, is maybe a question for a little bit later.
No, I think that's a really good question. And I think we'll talk about it when we talk about values, but I'll kind of sneak peek it to say that you sort of have to figure out what you personally value about the holidays, like what's important to you, not what was important to your parents, not what's important to your sister or brother, not what's important to your neighbors, but what's important to you. And, I've been fortunate that because I'm Jewish and my husband's Catholic, like we've sort of been able to, by, blending our faiths or whatever, like come up with totally new traditions, right? That are a little more secular, but very fun, blending the two things. But I think that that's a task for any parent, right? When they have kids, is to figure out which of the traditions they want to hang on to and which they want to toss and which new traditions they want to make. So that's a really good point, Gretchen. And I'll talk about that too, as I said, a bit more when I talk about values at the end. I should say too, in play to your strengths, we're going to talk in the next slide about delegating. The stuff that you're not good at, you got to delegate to other people. So we'll get to that, more on that in a minute. The last thing I want to talk about, which is a great strategy for managing anxiety all the time, not just during the holiday time, is considering the worst case scenario. So a lot of the moms that I work with get so caught up in all the stuff that they want to be doing during the holidays that they don't stop to consider, like, really how important are these things, and how bad it would actually be if these things didn't come through as they'd hoped. So like, this is, for example, the mom who comes in and says to me, oh my gosh, like my kid only wants this one thing for the holidays and I can't find it, right? Or I ran out of time because work was crazy and I couldn't make this pie I always make at the holidays, right? And I think because there's so much stress around the holidays and so much pressure put on us from social media, from friends, etc., I think we can often get really tied up with all of the stuff we want to be doing and don't stop to think, like, does this really matter? Like, will it really be a huge deal if my kid doesn't get this toy they really want? Or will it be like the end of the world if this pie doesn't make it to our holiday table? Another sort of helpful thing to ask yourself when you're asking yourself to consider the worst case scenario about some of these kind of minor holiday worries is to also ask yourself, will I even be thinking about this like a week, a month, a year from now? I love that question because I think it helps to decatastrophize a lot of the kind of smaller stuff worries that moms have, right? To consider, all right, like, yeah, I'm upset now about the pie, but like, am I really going to care about the pie even like tomorrow? Like a week from now, I'll have moved on from that pie. Similarly, like with the kid not getting the gift they want, like, well, you'll probably just end up getting it for them for their birthday. And in the meantime, like, how long are they going to pine for this toy realistically, right? Especially because I'm sure in your back pocket, you've got a million other things that they would like, that'll be their gifts. So I think considering the worst case scenario can be really helpful because a lot of times I think moms get so caught up in holiday stress that they really don't stop themselves to be like, all right, really, what's the worst thing here, right? Like, how bad is this actually going to be? So I'm a big fan of that. As I said, not just during holiday time, but other time too. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to more behavioral stuff. So talking about changing your behavior to help with holiday prep. So I'm going to start talking about planning ahead. For those of you who celebrate Hanukkah, unfortunately, Hanukkah's already over. So you'll have to store this info in your brain for next holiday. But planning ahead can be really, really helpful in the lead up to holidays. In CBT in general, we're very big into like breaking big tasks down into smaller pieces. That's like one of the tried and true strategies that we use in CBT kind of across the board. And where I think it's helpful with holidays is to basically around Thanksgiving, kind of take stock of all the things you need to do for the holidays, write all those things down on a list and break all those tasks into manageable pieces and basically assign yourself and others days and weeks that you will be handling all of those pieces. So it may be that you're like, all right, I'm going to do gifts this 1 week. Maybe it's like the week of Cyber Monday and Black Friday, right? And you'll say, all right, so I'm going to do like, kids gifts on these 3 days and then mom's gift on this day and dad's gift on this day or whatever. And then leading up to food prep, if you're hosting, like, this is when I'm going to plan to go to the grocery store. This is what I'm going to plan to get the recipes together, whatever it is. Basically breaking these big tasks down into smaller pieces and very specifically assigning yourself pieces. This is helpful for a lot of reasons. It breaks down, the overwhelm, right? Because you're not waiting till the 11th hour. I think particularly if you're a working parent, right, when it can be sort of hard during the day to get time to do this, you're just giving yourself sort of small tasks to do, right? So that it's not overwhelming and so that you can, and by the way, as a working parent, this is how I manage the holidays too. I practice what I preach, right? Like, so it means that like on any given week, you don't have like a ton of stuff to do and it's stuff you can easily fit in on a weekend or like, with a quick click of a mouse after work hours one day or two or something like that. I think it just makes it less daunting, right? And I think it helps with delegating, which is my next point, right? Where if you have a list of all the things that need to be done, you can then figure out, all right, what am I going to do? And what am I going to ask other people to do, right? So that you're not doing everything. So that leads me into my next point, which is the importance of delegating. So I have had many moms tell me, no, I'm the only one who can do the holidays. I also hear some version of that for other things, like I'm the only one who can do birthday parties, or I'm the only one who can do whatever. You are not the only one who can bring the holiday magic. I assure you. You may be best at bringing holiday magic, but you're not the only one. So what I often will tell people to think about, again, when they're planning ahead, is to think, all right, what are your strengths, right? Playing to your strengths like we talked about before. So you stick with that stuff that you're good at, and the stuff that you're not good at, or the stuff that's not fun for you, or the stuff you don't care about, you should delegate out to other people, to your partner, to your parents, to your in-laws, to basically anyone who's willing to help, right? Because anyone can order stuff from Amazon. Anyone can go food shopping, right? These are not really complicated tasks. There may be certain things, again, you really like to do, and you should continue to do those things. But for any things that you're willing to offload, you should offload. What I hear back from moms when I say this is they'll say, yeah, but nobody does this stuff as well as I do. That's probably true, right? You may be the best at all of those things. So you can choose to do all those things for yourself, but at what cost to you, right? And that's always a question I'm asking moms, holiday time or no. You can do everything, but at what personal cost, right? To my mind, if you've got little kids and you have, say, a partner who's willing to do all the gift wrapping, If your partner is not as good as you are at gift wrapping, who cares? Give your partner that task, because then that's one big thing off your plate. And the truth is, your kids are not going to notice, right? Your kids are not going to care. I think what gets lost too, not just during the holidays, but always, is that like, moms will really want to do things very perfectly, when in reality, we're doing all this stuff for our kids. And most of the time, our kids don't care or even notice, right? So, if you're one of those moms who feels, well, I'm the one who's best at bringing the magic, I don't doubt that. But I think you really want to take stock of how stressed out you are. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, again, give whatever you can to other people and play to their strengths as well, right? Like my mom is retired and she's happy to like go run to Target on a Tuesday when there's not that many people there. So like if she'll do that for me, awesome. Because the alternative for me is going, on a Saturday afternoon when it's a mob scene and horrendous, right? So you really want to think about delegating. And I put a point in here too about considering self-care, which is to say, like, I'm a big advocate of like moms taking care of themselves. And I don't mean like Manny's petties. I mean, that might be how you take care of yourself, but I mean making sure that you're always on your own priority list. You're doing those things that help you feel like yourself and help you feel replenished. And it's important that you continue to care for yourself during the holidays. And the nice thing about delegating is if you say, take all the wrapping off of your plate, you have all that time to then do something for yourself. Maybe it is getting a manicure. Maybe it's going to on a walk with your friend. Maybe it's exercising, right? It's important for you to continue to take care of yourself during a crazy time like this.
And flip side, it could mean that your you time is being the best rapper, not rapper, RAP, but wrapping the presents. It could be like that is your beautiful me time, but you've delegated everything else so that you can do both self-care and be the best rapper ever.
It's whatever you like to do. And a lot of this holiday stuff people like to do, and that's awesome. Like do everything you like to do, but the stuff that you don't like to do, farm out, right? So divide and conquer that stuff so that you have time to do the stuff that's meaningful to you. Okay, so my last point sort of has two parts to it. Part one is just say screw it, and then part two is consider schedules. These things will seem kind of contradictory, but I'll explain to you why they aren't. So just say screw it is also coming from my own personal experience of really trying and failing to be Pinterest mom, among other things. I talk about this in my book, but like I had where my older son was in kindergarten, they did like a Thanksgiving celebration and encouraged the parents to like dress their kids like people at the first Thanksgiving, which I feel like is not very politically correct or appropriate these days, but whatever, who am I to judge? Anyway, so I tried to do this and I just failed. I sent my son to school in no costume and I see these kindergartners marching in looking like they had just stepped off the Mayflower. And I was like, oh my God, this is like, the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And so I got to the point, and this is back to the play to your strengths thing, where I had to just say, screw it. Right? I'm not going to do this. I'm making a choice not to do this because it doesn't work for me. So there's the just say screw it in that sense. There's also the just say screw it in terms of what your plans are for during the holidays. So holiday break, right, means that everybody is off their schedules, off their routines. Many people go stay at other people's homes or in hotels, so they're not even home. What this means is that it is very difficult to maintain your child's schedule, right? Meaning naps, meaning eating appropriately, meaning bedtimes, meaning screen time rules, right? These things can be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to maintain during a time when everyone's schedules are totally up in the air, when you may not be staying at home, and when, as is the case with holidays, your kids are probably over-sugared, right? Over-gifted, probably overtired. They're probably surrounded by a lot of people they don't normally see, right? With all of those things happening, the likelihood that you're going to be able to keep your nice schedule and routine for your kid is very low. And something that moms come to me and talk about a lot is their anxiety about their kids' naps or their kids eating, again, or their kids' screen time. Like, oh my gosh, we're going to my sister's house and she doesn't enforce a bedtime for her kids and her kids are on their iPads all day long and there's candy everywhere. I just don't know how I'm going to manage this. What I always answer a mom like that is I'll say, you're not going to manage it. You can't expect yourself to manage it. You've got to just say, screw it, right? You've got to put yourself in the mindset that while you are on holiday break, things are going to be really crazy and really intense and really stressful. And you can't pressure yourself to maintain your kid's schedule, because all that's going to do is create so much more difficulty for you, when in reality, it's not going to work. I myself, again, am an example of this. Like, I remember trying to nap my sons in the middle of Christmas at my mother-in-law's. My mother-in-law is very popular. There's people coming by all day on Christmas to her house, and they would ring the doorbell and my kids would wake up. So then we put a sign up that said, "Shh, baby napping, don't ring the doorbell." People still rung the doorbell, even with the sign there. And eventually I had to throw out my hands and be like, all right, my kid's just not napping today, right? Or like, my kid's eating sugar all day. I've had that happen too. I think you have to say screw it, or else you will have so much pressure on yourself to control things and only just get frustrated when you can't. Moms will respond to this and say to me, but if my kid doesn't nap, or if my kid has too much sugar or too many screens, they will have a tantrum. To them, I say, your kid's probably going to have a tantrum regardless, right? I mean, that's why the holidays were so hard for me those first couple of years, because kids out of their routines always struggle. And no matter how hard you try to put their routine on them, if it's not there, if they're not home, if they're with unfamiliar people, if there's a lot of new stimuli, they are not going to be able to stay on their routine, and they're going to tantrum regardless. So you might as well just take the pressure off yourself. Try to have a good time during the holidays. Let your kids play Nintendo for, 8 hours while you can actually talk to the adults upstairs. Like, whatever it is you need to do, I'm a big fan of saying screw it, just for the time that you are, staying with relatives and off routine. Once you get back home, routine starts again. Now, the second part of this, making schedules, seems very much at odds with saying screw it. But what I mean by schedules is just every night before that. I'm, by the way, a big fan of schedules always, holidays or no. But I think especially during the holiday times, if you can, the night before, on each day of vacation, think through a schedule for the next day, a very loose one, which maybe looks something like, wake up, get bagels, take a walk into town, walk back, watch Elf, play outside with friends. I mean, it can literally be something that general. But if you can set a schedule like that for yourself and communicate it to your kids, it will actually really reduce anxiety around these kind of unstructured times, because unstructured time always breeds anxiety, for adults and for kids as well. I know it does for me. So if you can think ahead of time, again, a very loose schedule for each day while you're away at relatives or while you are out of daycare and work, it can really, really help reduce anxiety. And like I said, communicate it to your kids. I mean, be aware that if you're staying at someone else's house or whatever, like, the schedule might get upended, and that's fine. I think it's just nice to wake up in the morning kind of having a plan for the day. So that's where the schedules come in. And you can take us to the next one, Gretchen. The last thing I want to talk about before we open it up for questions, which I talked about a bit before, is considering what your values are. This is going to sound very cheesy, but like, you really want to think about, what do the holidays mean to me? What's important to me, in the holiday times, and what's not. And like Gretchen rightly pointed out, like, the stuff that was maybe important to your parents when you were growing up, or relatives or whatever, might not be those things that are important to you. So I think it's really, really, really critical to think through, all right, like, what do I want these holidays to be about for me and for my family? Actually, in Mom Brain, I have a whole values worksheet in the appendix, and one section of it is about holidays and special events, and it actually takes you through trying to articulate, what your values are around holidays and what's important to you. But basically, you want to think about, like, what do I want these holidays to be about for me and for my kids? And let me really try to focus my efforts on those things. And if you find yourself getting really anxious or overwhelmed by any kind of task, ask yourself, like, is this even a values consistent task? I mean, back to me with the Pinterest stuff, like, that stuff is not values consistent to me. So, I've never cared about crafting. My kids don't care about crafting. So why am I getting myself anxious and worked up about this? So I don't mean to sound cheesy, but I think it's really important to think through what you want to make sure the holidays, are about for you and for your kids, and really use that as a guidepost when you're making decisions about what you want to do and the efforts you want to go to, in various areas. I think that'll really help you too, and help to reduce anxiety.
So true. Oh, thank you for landing on that. I think we have a question that's sort of related to that too, which would be a wonderful tip off. So Emily, I'm going to not share my screen, correct? We'll do.
Yeah, let's get out of screen share.
All right, let's get out of screen share. And we had a really great question. I'm going to read most of it because it's a little bit of a big one. So holidays are a time when relatives aren't really around consistently, and maybe they're making comments or suggestions. I think I might have did like a mini version of this. Do you have any tips on how to respond to outside commenting on like a parenting choice, or something that they would do in the moment? I think, for example, it could be holiday related, it could not be holiday related. Your child's not getting enough sleep, needs more sleep, you don't have a consistent sleep schedule, or you're spoiling your child by doing all this, let them cry. Like, I'm sure that's probably heightened in the holidays when things are bonkers.
Yes. So I have a lot to say about this, not just on the holiday times, but at all times. So I'll give a short answer, but know that I have a lot more to say, and do in the book. Yes. So the first thing, and what you're talking about is judgments, which is very closely related to the comparison making stuff, right? When basically other people are doing the comparing for you, they're telling you that like, I'm looking at you and I don't think you compare well to other people, to other moms, or what other people are doing. One of the things that I really encourage moms to think about when they're getting judgments thrown at them is to consider the messenger. Think about who is doing the judging, right? And very similar to what I say about comparison making, I have them thinking about, okay, well, are these people whose opinions you value and whose values you share? Older relatives are a great example of this, because older relatives often have different ideas about parenting. Things were done very differently when we were kids than they are done now, and will be different for, when our children are parents. So that's one issue. It could be that they're of another generation. Again, it could be somebody judging you who's a very different kind of parent than you. I was mentioning before, right? Like you may have a sister or brother or something, close friend, who clearly judges you, but whose values are very different than yours around parenting. So the trick is just to really think about who's the messenger here, right? Because a lot of times we internalize these judgments and we allow them to make us feel bad about ourselves and our parenting, when in reality, the people who are judging us are not people whose opinions we really value in this particular domain, right? Or whose values we share. And so we can't control the judgments coming in, but we can control our response to it and whether or not we internalize these judgments. And again, that's where I think considering the messenger is really, really important. Another thing that's related to that, we talk a lot about in DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy. It's an offshoot of CBT, which I talk about a lot in the book too. It's a concept called validation, where you're working really hard to try to figure out where a person is coming from. So if a person disagrees with you, it's not about validating them and saying, oh yeah, you know what, you're right. It's not about that. But it's just about trying to think, okay, why is this person saying this? Like, and does this make sense given where this particular person is coming from? And I think validation can be really helpful when other people are judging you too, right? Because again, if you can take a step back and say, it actually really makes sense that, my mom is really seizing on this comment to me because I know that she's really conscious of not having done this well with me and my siblings. And so this is striking a nerve for her. This issue strikes a nerve for her. And I happen to know that it always has. So I can see where she's coming from. I can validate her position, but I also know that this issue doesn't work the same way with me, right? And I know the place she's coming from. And so I'm just going to let it be. And I'm going to say, okay, and I'm just going to move on, right? And that's one other thing I'll say about this, which is like, I don't generally advocate for defensively clapping back to these things, because it never leads to anything good. I am not a big fan of defensive clapbacks anywhere, but especially with a nosy relative or whatever, like I'm a big fan of the smile and nod, and you just move on to something else.
There's a cocktail waiting for you, yep, Mom. Yep. Here you go.
Mm-hmm. Or a nice big piece or something. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I love the judgment and there's a space there that you can kind of deflect from it. Yeah. Bringing it back, I think there's one more question going down to kids and comparisons. And so any advice for how to talk to your kids about those comparisons? For example, if they bring attention that well, their friend's mom did this, and why didn't you? And especially around the holidays, I'm sure that's heightened.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Um, and it's interesting because like being raised Jewish, like we had tons of that. I would always say to my parents, well, like, why don't we have a tree? And what's up? Why doesn't Santa like us? There's like, I lived that many times as a kid. So, it's interesting. I actually think you can talk to kids about values too in an age appropriate way to basically say, okay, this might be what so-and-so's mom is doing, but like every family has different traditions around the holidays and every family does things differently based on kind of what's important for them and like what works in their house. And like, this is how things work best in our house, right? And maybe things work differently in so-and-so's house. Because again, you're not saying, oh gosh, well, you know what? Your friend is spoiled. You don't want to say that, right? You also don't want to be like, okay, I'll buy you 8 more presents. No. You don't want to do that either. So you just want to stress, everyone does holidays differently. I mean, I can say that now that we celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah, like I'm not getting my kids 8 nights of presents for Hanukkah. Like that's bananas. I'm not going to do that. They get Hanukkah presents, they get Christmas presents. Like it's not happening. And there was definitely a time when like my older son, when he was little and be like, but some of my friends get 8 nights of presents. And I was like, yeah, I totally understand that. I said, in our family, we celebrate both holidays. And so we really try to spread the presents out, and so I think that's the way you do it. I think you just want to bring it back to like, these are our traditions. And this is what, me and if there's a partner, me and your dad, your mom, whomever, this is what we're most comfortable with. And this is what works for our family.
Have you ever introduced and said, what traditions or what types of things would you want to do next year that are different or creative? And I mean, you probably have to step on a landmine because they could say, well, I want to do more presents next year. And you could say, well, that's actually not the option. But, within these parameters, like what are the types of things we could build on for next year?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's really nice. Like, I think like I said, I kind of feel fortunate in that, like, my husband and I have been sort of forced to create new holiday traditions because now we celebrate kind of everything. But it's been really nice. And our kids have been involved in that. And there's stuff that like, as a family now, we're like really into that, like neither of our families particularly did when we were growing up. And so I do think it's a great opportunity to say, yeah, like what are some things you want to incorporate into our holidays? Absolutely.
I have a question I can ask. You talked about the screw it strategy. And I definitely think, that's great in a lot of cases because it's impossible to do everything and some things just may not be important to you. How do you handle it though, if it's important to your child? And I can give like a very specific example. My daughter's preschool had a week of like funny, different, dress up. It was like a spirit week. One of them was sports jerseys, which I was like, really? Like not everybody watches sports or like has $100 kids jerseys lying around. My daughter's so into that kind of thing. I mean, I ended up borrowing one from another mom because I was like, I have to get her a jersey. She'll be so disappointed if she goes to school and everyone else is wearing one and she's not. So, I find she's so into all of those things. And I have trouble letting things slide because I want to do all of the things. And I do sometimes have a hard time prioritizing or then not feeling that mom guilt if I'm not doing something.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I think there's a couple things you can do. I think that there are some things that your kids value so much that as far as I'm concerned, they become your values too. You bring up sports, which is funny because that is the case in my house. I have 2 sports bananas children, particularly my older son who loves football. I could care less about football. Frankly, my husband could care less about football. My son got really into that and loves football. And so I have had to incorporate football like into my values to say, okay, we've got to consider like football when we're thinking about Sunday plans and stuff. It's not something I value, but my kids value it enough that it's become something that I've learned to value. So I think there's partly that. But I think it's also partly it's okay to say no to your kids sometimes, right? So for example, were my sons to want to watch a football game when we have like a family thing that I want to go to, like I'm going to say no, right? I mean, like, and similar for you, Emily, like if you hadn't been able to find that jersey, you're going to say no rather than purchase an $100. I know those jerseys are a fortune, right? Like, it's one of those things. So I think it's a balance. I think there are times when your kid clearly values something so much that you just decide, all right, well, this is my thing too now. Like I'm like a sports mom now. Like this was not me growing up. But is how I'm rolling now. And I get to sort of live it through my kids, and it's fun. But then also to say no too, right? And there are times when it might be something your kid really values, but like, if you're like, I'm sorry, this is like me in like, I don't know, second grade when I was desperate for Teddy Ruxpin, and one kid in my class had Teddy Ruxpin, and I'm dating myself now, God. Anyway, it's like, but anyway, it was this bear who talked, for those of you who are younger than I am, which is probably most of you. And my parents were like, no, like, we're not going to get you Teddy Ruxpin. I was like, but please. And I begged for Teddy Ruxpin, and I wanted for Hanukkah, didn't get it for Hanukkah, never got Teddy Ruxpin. Right. So there are some things also that you can say no to. And of course that gets into boundary setting, which is a whole different conversation. But I think that's what it's about. Right. And certainly those things your kids value that you think are kind of meaningful and interesting are definitely worth nurturing, for sure, even if they're not things that you value specifically.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's great. Last minute questions from anyone. I could ask like 100 more questions, but I know we're just about at time. I loved so much of the what you talked about today. And it really resonated for me personally. The not knowing what everyone has going on behind the scenes. I made a comment earlier, I've been so surprised to learn that, people I know have had au pairs for years that I didn't know about, and their kids are in school full time, and, or whatever it is, they have nannies in addition to preschool, and you just never know, like you said, how much help people are getting, or what really is going on behind the scenes. So that was helpful to see. And I love some of the strategies you presented too. I have a hard time not trying to do all the things. I'm not a Pinterest mom either. My mom was super crafty, did all of the things. And, I made this comment earlier too, but I want to do those things with my daughter. So I do feel bad not doing them. But, I ended up just purchasing kits. All of that's available now. My daughter and I made birdhouses the other day. Like, I was not like sawing the wood and figuring out what design. We put stickers on them, and I painted all my sides green. I was just like, good enough,
There you go.
She loved it. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I think this was really valuable. Maybe we can do another talk in the future sometime on some of those other topics, because, so many of us struggle with a lot of them, and they are all so helpful. Thank you, Gretchen. It's always a pleasure to partner with Vivvi. And thank you everybody who attended. Is there anything else you want to say, Gretchen?
No, I look forward for a follow-up from Emily, and these are wonderful bite-sized resources. I talked to Ilyse on Monday, and I actually put a couple of these strategies into play with my husband in the last couple of days, like organically. So I'm so excited for you all to take this information and bring it into real life.
Thank you guys so much for having me too. It was great. And if anyone has any further questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm easy to find. I'm Dr. CBT Mom on social media, and I'm easy to find, so don't hesitate.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season. Don't stress too much and enjoy.
Yes, take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.